Hello, everyone, again. I'm delighted to be chairing this session, Europe Votes, Europe's Democratic Trajectory. It's obviously a crucial moment, and we're literally just a few weeks from European elections. They only happen every 5 years, and it's the big exercise in democracy that happens within the EU. That will, of course, in turn trigger a whole rejigging, or maybe not, of some of the big top EU jobs, who heads the European Commission, the Council, and so forth. So a lot at stake. So I'd like to welcome our 3 MEPs, straight from the campaign trail, in some instances, to join me on the stage. So Michiel Hoogeveen, a member of the European Parliament for the Netherlands, Morten Løkkegaard, a member of the European Parliament here in Denmark, and Lidia Pereira, a member from Portugal. Thank you very much. So we've a nice geographical and political, I think, balance. And special thanks to you, Morten Løkkegaard, for joining us. You're replacing, we had a last-minute change. Marketa Gregorova could not be with us, so thanks for stepping in. Look, just to start quite generally, we're hearing a lot about the problem of disinformation and election interference. How big of an issue do you think this is for the European Parliament? I'll start with you, Michiel.
Well, if you look at not only the European Parliament elections, but if you look at elections in general, I think it's a problem. I think we're coming from a time where politicians, when they made statements, when they gave their opinions, they were carefully vetted and fact-checked in journals or magazines. And right now, you can have your stage on social media and you can just basically say whatever you like. You can gain a lot of traction with that. So I think there's also a responsibility with the politicians themselves. And that's also coming from the outside, that they're tapping into these anxieties that these politicians are propagating.
Lidia.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's good to have a little break from the campaign trail and to discuss these important topics. Well, when it comes to disinformation, we are in a very strange time, but it's not going to change. What we have to deal with is to try to learn in navigating through this new framework of information being spread in a very quick way. And we need to form a coalition of politicians, of stakeholders, to find a way to legitimate what is told in the internet, for example. And I do believe that disinformation can contribute to a lot of challenges in our democracy, but it can also create the necessary framework to to navigate through these new modern ways of doing politics. I don't think social media is going to disappear, quite the contrary. So we politicians and the rest of the society, we have to learn in adapting to these new ways of doing politics, and obviously reinforcing the mechanisms to do the necessary checks and balances in disinformation. So I do think that there is a huge responsibility from the media perspective. They still play a huge role, and one of the things that I think it is necessary is to make sure that the politicians are not away or aside of the media. And there is a little bit of incentive sometimes to push the politicians away from the media, and then they are in the social media, in the social networks. So I think we need to find a way of reconciling these new elements and trying to define the right framework to deal with it. But obviously using the social media as partners and not as agents of evil.
Yeah, Morten Løkkegaard, I mean, what do you think, I mean, where should, not the blame lie, but how is Europe dealing with this? Should politicians be doing more to try and rein in social media giants? Whose responsibility is it to try and improve this social media landscape that we see infiltrating the election cycles and leading in a lot of cases to misinformation proliferating?
Well, I've been a part of a committee in the Parliament dealing with hybrid wars, so to speak. Also disinformation, and I would say that we have been all too naive, and we a lot of responsibility ourselves as politicians because we didn't see the danger coming, and now we are sort of reacting to things instead of preventing things from happening. So we actually need to do both. I mean, in Denmark, it's not as big as a problem as in many other countries, I would admit, but right at the moment, and some of the audience would know, it's just exploding because we have this very heated debate about deep fakes, how AI as a technology are dealt with at a political level, because Danish political parties actually use deep fakes at the same time as they are, protesting and talking about them as an evil. So it's a kind of, temptation that we have to resist. I think as politicians, we might not be able to, at least. And that was, as late as yesterday, I suggested this to the Speaker of the House in the Danish Parliament, to create some kind of code of conduct, so we at least as political parties can rally together about this, so we at least could show our voters and the audience as such that we take this seriously.
Yeah, interesting points there. I mean, you're all campaigning for re-election, and I know you've been out at the doorstep, as it were. I think Brussels and Strasbourg are pretty empty at the moment, with a lot of the politicians back in their home countries trying to get some votes. Just to get into some of the big themes of this election, one of the features we have seen over the last few months, really, has been massive farming protests in particular. It's happened in Brussels, but also in Italy and Spain. And a backlash of sorts against towards the EU's climate policy. Ursula von der Leyen, who we heard from earlier, put the Green Deal at the heart of her mandate 5 years ago. Now we don't hear that much about it. It's kind of been, it's more of a sideshow. Maybe starting with you, Lidia Pereira. You're a member of the centre-right European People's Party, the EPP, von der Leyen's party. Do you think that the EU has gone too far when it comes to climate regulation?
Well, first of all, I think the Green Deal has not came out of the political agenda at the moment. Quite the contrary. If we look at the past 5 years, the Green Deal was presented in, I think, December 2020, and then at the peak of the pandemic, we approved the European climate law. And so over the past 5 years, climate and environment have been central to the political agenda in the European field. Now, the question is, did we acknowledge for the necessary efforts for, a difficult transition in combining the legislation being implemented and the response from the agents impacted by the legislation? So I think one of the difficulties that we faced and that resulted in the protests is that the transition is eventually a little bit is being demanded in a quicker way than the capacity that these agents can, and in particular the farmers, can accommodate. But this does not mean that that there is this sense of being against the climate policy. It's just like asking for a little bit of more reason when it comes to the implementation of the legislation, and learning and trying to understand the context. Like 5 years ago, we did not have a war in Europe. And we don't have a war inside the European borders, but we have a war in Europe. So in terms of the food security, things have changed, and we also have to acknowledge that. And I do believe that one of the challenges for the next term is to make sure that we keep the track in terms of our climate goals for the 2030 and for climate neutrality by 2050. And I do not think that is at stake. I have been leading several negotiations, in particular for the position of the European Parliament to the COPs, but also in creating the voluntary carbon credit market in the EU. So I do believe that we are in a condition that we can meet the climate goals, but we also have to, in the dialogue, keep all the agents inside and involved in this transition. That we know it's not easy, but we need to make an effort. And so, in dialogue, I think we can achieve these objectives.
Yeah, thank you. Your party, and you've been very critical of, you're part of the ECR group, that
Yes.
conservative group in the Parliament. You've been very critical, obviously, of a lot of EU regulation on business and climate.
For sure.
You have a smile on your face about this kind of shift in emphasis, we'll say, away from climate targets?
Well, not a smile on my face, because I'm speaking to entrepreneurs, not only farmers, but also small, medium-sized businesses who are now being victimized by the European Commission with stringent rules and regulations. The European Commission, when they came into being in 2019, they promised a one-in, one-out principle. So every new rule that was introduced, they would have an older rule removed. They haven't adhered to this. And what we're seeing now is that the politicians and the European Commission is now recognizing that they have been too fast with their climate regulation as well. And it has now backfired. I mean, it's very easy to sit in a boardroom and say, well, we want to be net zero in 2050, or we come up with a Fit for 55. It all sounds very nice, but it's all very far away in the future. But if you start actually implementing it, and if you start to have these effects on our small, medium-sized businesses, on our farmers, they have to deal with the effects of this stringent bureaucratic rules and regulation, and that has now been backfired. So not a smile on my face in terms of, because our entrepreneurs are having really this hard time, but it makes me glad to hear that that common sense, that a new strategy is now creeping into the European Parliament when it comes to, for example, focusing on green growth, for example, on focusing more on market-driven innovations instead of a centralized system of subsidies and more debt.
And yet the European Union has to be careful that it does not lose out in terms of environmentally friendly innovation. We've seen the US invest in the Inflation Reduction Act. We see China getting ahead of the curve on electric vehicles. So surely business needs to be at the table and be on top of this and be ahead when it comes to this.
That brings up the question, does the United States have an effective policy? I mean, the Inflation Reduction Act is mostly based on tax breaks for companies that are considered green, but you also see that the US government debt is skyrocketing, and this debt at some point has to be repaid. Same goes for China. If you look at the state-subsidized companies, not many of them are actually performing that well. If you look at the private enterprises in China, they are performing much better. So I think in the European Union, we should recognize that we should open up our markets, we should have free trade, we should focus on free trade, and more on private investments instead of focusing on these highly subsidized tax breaks that we're seeing right now.
Morten, just on this point about the Green Deal, I mean, you're in the Liberal Renew Europe group. I mean, what's your view on this? Do you think, it's a difficult balance. You've got a particularly younger electorate who are very engaged with the issue of climate change. I mean, are you getting that on the doorstep? Is it coming up as an issue, this whole climate issue, or not so much?
I think it's difficult to be a Dane in this discussion because we are a completely different place in Denmark when we compare to many of the other countries that we are dealing with here and discussing, because our goals and our task is much more ambitious than the European one. So trying to bring on these very nice arguments, I can't disagree with most of what you said. Being a liberal myself and a market liberal also, it's also very difficult to go up against the Danish discussion, which is quite more green in the sense of the word. So what I would agree that competitiveness is on the agenda again. After decades out in the cold. Now it's on the agenda, and we all need to take this into consideration. We are entering a new phase in this discussion about climate change because now we also have to deal with the problems of financing. I mean, we are talking about 1.5 trillion euros in the years to come in investments, and who is going to pay this? And this is why we have the farmers protesting, basically, because they can see that they have to pay as well. And so there's other groups and other interests in this society. So this fight is ongoing right now, and it's not a coincidence. It's because we are entering into the hard phase after all the speeches, after all the agreements on the goals. We need now to get back to reality. And that's why we, as Venstre and as a Renew group, talk about green realism. We need to get to the phase of realism now. And of course, it's not to say that you can't negotiate with climate as such. We need to get to the goals, but we need to find the right ways to financing and the right ways to actually pay for this. And this is not an easy task. It never was, and that's what we see right now.
And of course, one of the issues that contributed to the farming protest this year was concern about Ukrainian exports or grain and other products coming through Europe. Yes. And that, of course, is a big worry. We were hearing a lot this morning about Ukraine and its membership perspective for the EU. Now, we also heard European Council President Charles Michel saying he is confident that there'll be a kind of I'm misquoting, but a pro-Ukraine parliament in the next 5 years. But I think it is a concern that, once Europe was faced with the reality, of a possible Ukrainian integration into the single market, that was the response. It was protest. But on that issue, just thinking about the shape of the next European Parliament, we've seen a lot of the polling showing there's going to be a shift to the right in the next elections. Lidia, Pereira, how do you feel? You're part of the EPP, which is the largest group in the European Parliament. I mean, how do you feel about tying up with maybe the ECR or other more right-wing groups in the next mandate? Would you favour that?
That's a very good question. And actually, on several occasions, me and Michiel, we've worked together, so it's not a brand new, let's say, coalition. Well, I think there is a lot of speculation about the composition of the next parliament, and there's the fear of the composition of the next parliament is being spreaded. And I do think that we need a little bit of reason and sense in reading this new outcome of the European elections. I mean, democracies are in their lowest levels of approval worldwide. And so there's a lot of discontent in the societies. And I do believe that moderate parties and moderate politicians need to understand this and need to deliver for people. Over the past 5 years, on several occasions, I felt like there was a loss of sense or focus from some of the parliamentary groups in the parliament in falling in the trap of the most radicalized fringes of their moderate political groups. So I do believe that there is a priority for the next term, which is for the moderate political parties to sit together and to understand what are the objectives for the next term and try to put aside, the little battles and wars that lead nowhere. We are in a difficult situation with the war in Ukraine, with the war in the Middle East, with several regional wars outside of Europe in other geographies in the world that can quickly become international conflicts. And I think for the next term, the priority of keeping the European Union speaking at one voice, which has been critical on several occasions, is something that we really need to deliver. And so there is this a priority for the moderate political parties to find again in the European Parliament, which is the house of compromise, that we have to deliver for our people and that we are serving our people and not losing track of what brought us to the Parliament in the first place.
Okay. Michiel, you represent the Netherlands. There's obviously been a big right-wing swing there we saw in recent elections. What's your view on the makeup of the next European Parliament? Do you think the ECR will be a kingmaker of sorts in the next Parliament?
Could be, and I find it actually quite interesting that I'm campaigning for a few weeks now, and most of the debates I'm in is about the danger of a far-right rise in the European Parliament. Now, I don't really think the risk is that, in terms of policy, is that these parties could become bigger. I think it's a healthy democratic course correction. People have been asking for a more strict migration policy for decades now. They are crying out for less bureaucracy, a more competitive economy. So I don't think the risk is there in terms of policy. I think the main risk is, and that's with the experience that you and I probably share, is that when you look at the fringes of the European Parliament, these are very effective politicians when it comes to being angry, saying how it should be, but not on delivering actual policy. If you look at the groups that are on the fringes, whether it's the far left or the far right, they are not very effective, or actually completely ineffective, in terms of legislative power. So what I think the biggest risk is that these parties, as we've seen in the Netherlands right now, is that these parties will become so big that they need to start delivering but they're unable to do so. And that even creates a more dissatisfied democracy across Europe.
Morten?
Yeah, but let's talk straight here. We're not talking about ECR as the right-wing populist here. I mean, if you get rid of the polls, we can talk about a group where you're actually quite moderate. We had very good experiences, for instance, in the Internal Market Committee where I've been working with you guys on taxation, on market issues. I didn't hear you say anything wrong today. I mean, it's obvious that we can make policies with you. And of course, we hope to do that also if you get your act together in your group. What really matters is the ID group. That's basically what we are talking about. I mean, with parties financed by the Russians. I mean, come on, this is a total different matter. And of course, we have to deal with that. And I would agree at your analysis that these groups are unable to do anything efficient. I don't expect them to. I expect them to growth, yes, but I don't expect them to be a part of the coalition at all, at any moment in time. So what we're talking about is basically whether the von der Leyen coalition, which is SD, EPP, and us in Renew, whether this will have an absolute majority. I absolutely mean that I think we will have, but we will of course invite ECR to the table, and part of our groups also like to invite the Green Group. But they are totally, not trustworthy, so it's also a problem. Let's just hope that we can get our coalition back on track.
But just on that, I mean, you're saying the ECR are the kind of, the moderate wing of the right, if you like, in the parliament. But I mean, we have a situation where Viktor Orban may join the ECR group. I mean, would you be happy to?
Not really. I can't say that. That's now. I just said it. I mean, that I can't. I don't think I could get more clear on this one. I think that within each group, we also have Meloni from Italy. I mean,
there might be bridges.
Yeah, there might be bridges, and in everyday politics, I think it's we are able to work with these groups. It's not about Orban or not Orban. It's about how we work in the daily work.
Can I just say? There might be bridges, but there have to be bridges with all political moderate groups and parties. So this is crucial. We cannot antagonize one side of the political spectrum expecting that the policies are going to be better. We need to find dialogue again. And I felt like over the past 5 years, and for example on taxation, and we've both worked a lot on that, there was... I have to say this, from the left camp of the parliament, a lot of times our concerns were not listened to. And this created, in the parliament, it created a rejection of several reports on taxation. So I really think, and I want to insist on this, dialogue is crucial and building bridges across political groups as well, understanding the red lines that one defines. In particular, are we willing to cooperate with parties that have a different understanding of the rule of law? Well, that has to be addressed, I think.
But I mean, it does sound from the three of you in a way that it's kind of this acceptance it has now set in, really, that there is going to be a shift to the right and everyone's okay with that. I mean, what about this liberal wing?
But if there's a shift to the right, it's about the people's choice. It's not that we are doing our job. We are on the campaign trail. I'm from the centre-right, but Michiel and the Liberals, I mean, they are doing their best. So we cannot antagonize what is the outcome. We have to deal with that, and we have to adjust to the new circumstances of the political camp.
Because it is a democratic election, and as you say, the voters will have their say. Really quick final question. I mean, it's linked to this. Another big issue is migration. Are you hearing this in the doors? I mean, fascinating statistic in the Democracy Perception Index that's just been out is that in Germany, migration is now topping priorities. That's been a big change around from the last few years. I mean, you guys finding this in the doorstep, or is the EU, I mean, we had the EU Asylum and Migration Pact through. Is it enough, or do you think this is going to be a big issue, and is that going to manifest itself in the election in a few weeks?
Well, it's actually quite interesting. I just had a meeting in the Danish parliament, and I was being told that in Denmark, this is not really an issue that's topping all the lists, because there is more or less consensus in Denmark on that a more strict but fair immigration system is needed. What we see in my country, the Netherlands, it's out of control. There is no control over our borders, over our migration system, over our asylum system. So that really needs to be changed. And our view is that if you want to have a successful common market with free movement of people, goods and services, you also need to have strong common borders. And that has been lacking for the last couple of decades.
I mean, Morten, just come in here on the Danish. Is that a characterization?
I don't know who you've been talking to, but at least in some part of the environment, at least outside Christiansborg, I think if you move to the countryside, I think that there's a lot of talk about migration. I wouldn't say that it's all, substantialized in the sense that the facts are worrying at all. We have things under control, so to speak. So much is right, but there's a lot of talk about it. There's a lot of fear still among people, and we realized that pretty late in our discussions within my party. I was responsible for our EU election program, and this was not at the top of the agenda at all because we shared this point of view. But lately we have been forced to realize that this is actually a big issue among voters. So we will come with the suggestions and ideas also in this field in the campaign. Yes.
Final thought to you, MEP Pereira.
Yeah, immigration is obviously one of the topics in the campaign as well in Portugal, and I think it is very important that we don't leave this topic for the radical parties. From the right wing and from the left. And I do believe that the Asylum and Migration Pact is not perfect, but it is one that was possible to find consensus on. And so I think it is one step towards a better coordination in terms of the migration policy in the EU.
And only a small step, though. Only a small step.
Well, it's one step. Even small.
Okay, well, thank you very much to our three members of the European Parliament who took out time from a very busy campaign schedule to join us here in Copenhagen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.